What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into a topic that sounds like a paranoid conspiracy theory, but is actually a multi-billion-dollar reality. We've all heard the golden rule of travel. Keep it under $10,000 and you're golden. Well, spoiler alert, that rule is a total lie. Today, we're counting down the 7 ways the government can legally snatch your cash at the airport without ever charging you with a crime. It's like the ultimate high-stakes unboxing video. Except Uncle Sam is doing the unboxing and he's keeping your stuff. But before we get into the madness, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chance to keep your hard-earned money where it belongs, in your pocket. Ready to see how $10,000 can turn into zero real quick? Let's jump into the countdown. 7. The International Declaration Paradox. Compliance is not a shield. So, you're a rule follower. You've got $15,000 for a dream vacation, and you know the law says you have to declare anything over $10,000 when crossing the border. You walk up to the Customs and Border Protection officer, chest puffed out, FinCEN Form 105 in hand. You're safe, right? Wrong. Here's the plot twist. The act of declaring your cash is basically like ringing a dinner bell for secondary screening. While it is 100% legal to carry $1 million if you declare it, agents can still seize it if they find your story suspicious, or if you make a tiny mistake. Check this out. There was a traveler who declared her cash perfectly, but she forgot about the $38 in her pocket. That put her over the limit by just enough to be a technical violation. And CBP used that tiny error to justify seizing the whole pile. Talk about an expensive tip. It's called a failure to report, and it accounts for roughly half of all airport currency seizures. Between 2000 and 2016, over $2 billion was seized by DHS agencies, and most of that came from people who just didn't get the paperwork exactly right. And it's not just paper bills. The government considers monetary instruments to include travelers' checks, money orders, and even signed checks where the payee line is blank. If you have a stack of those and don't count them toward your $10,000 total, you're in for a very awkward conversation. So, if being honest can still get your money taken, what happens if you try to share the load with your travel buddies? Is there safety in numbers? 6. The household aggregation doctrine, the family trap. Let's say you're traveling with your family. You've got $12,000 total, so you think, hey, I'll take $6,000 and my spouse will take $6,000. We're both under the $10,000 limit. Science! Well, the government's math works a little differently. It's called the household aggregation doctrine. If you live in the same house and travel together, that $10,000 limit isn't per person, it's per group. In one real-world case, a family of 4 had $13,000 seized because they honestly thought the limit was $10,000 each. They weren't criminals. They were just bad at reading the fine print on CBP Form 605-9B. Even if you're just a group of friends, if an officer decides you're part of a singular financial transaction, they can treat your separate envelopes of cash as one big pile and snatch it for structuring. It turns your family vacation into a group audition for a legal drama you never wanted to star in. And if you think you're safe just because you aren't leaving the country, think again.
Which brings us to a massive question. If you're just flying from Ohio to Florida, do the rules even apply?
5. The domestic referral pipeline, the TSA snitch system. This is the one that really trips people up. You're flying domestic, New York to LA. No borders, no customs, no problems, right? You can legally carry as much cash as you want on a domestic flight. There is no federal law against it. But here's how the pipeline works. The TSA is looking for bombs and weapons, but they are also trained to spot bulk currency on the X-ray. Cash shows up as a dense, uniform block that screams, "Look at me." Now, the TSA can't legally seize your money for civil forfeiture, but they have referral policies. They'll call over a DEA agent or a local cop and say, hey, the guy in the Hawaiian shirt at Gate 4 has a suspicious amount of hundreds in his carry-on.
Take the case of Rustam Kazazi. He was flying domestically with $58,100, his family's life savings. He was never charged with a crime, never arrested, but the agents took every penny because it looked suspicious. Or Charles Clark, a college student who saved up $11,000 over 5 years, only to have it snatched at the airport because his bag supposedly smelled like marijuana, even though no drugs were ever found. The domestic referral pipeline is basically a secret game of telephone where the TSA tells on you, and the police take your lunch money.
Wait, before we get to the top 4 ways your cash can get evaporated by the feds, it's time for our middle of the video check-in. If you're finding this info useful or terrifying, drop a comment below with the word secure, so I know you're still with me. And if you haven't already, check out our links in the description for a guide on how to handle an airport encounter. Seriously, knowing your rights is the difference between a great trip and a 7-month legal battle. Now, let's get back to the countdown. We've covered the oops moments, but what about when the government thinks you're being sneaky?
4. The structuring and smurfing trap, intent over legality.
In the labyrinthine world of federal law, there is a concept known as structuring, and it is arguably the government's favorite gotcha card. The premise stems from the Bank Secrecy Act, which requires financial institutions to file a currency transaction report, CTR, for any cash transaction exceeding $10,000. Structuring is defined as the act of intentionally breaking up large sums of cash into smaller, sub-$10,000 transactions specifically to evade this reporting requirement. Here is the kicker. The legality of the money is entirely irrelevant. You could have sold a classic car, withdrawn your life savings from a bank, or received a gift, all with a pristine paper trail and a notarized receipt in your pocket. If you decide to carry $9,500 on Tuesday and $9,500 on Wednesday, simply because you want to avoid the bureaucratic headache of filling out government forms, you have technically committed a federal crime under 31 U.S.C. Section 5324. Government agencies often label these practices as smurfing or bulk cash smuggling, assuming that any attempt to manage large sums of cash is a sign of illicit activity. During interrogations, agents often focus on how the money is stored, creating an impossible heads I win, tails you lose scenario for the traveler.
The gangster bundle. If your cash is neatly stacked, rubber-banded, or organized by denomination, agents will argue it is gangster-style preparation, typical of high-level drug traffickers.
The disorganized chaos. If your money is loose, wadded up, or shoved haphazardly into a bag, it is flagged as suspiciously unorganized, implying you are trying to obscure the true amount to evade detection. We have seen cases at Logan Airport where travelers had $10,000 sewn into their pant linings, a tactic agents wryly dubbed hot pockets. It wasn't the pizza kind. It was a "you're never seeing this money again" kind of situation. When the standard for guilt is based on the method of carrying cash rather than the nature of the cash itself, you are effectively trapped in a game rigged against you. But it gets weirder. Did you know your own money might be snitching on you without you even knowing it?
3. The narcotics nexus. Your cash is probably contaminated.
Here is a conversational tidbit guaranteed to kill the mood at any party. Roughly 80% to 90% of all US paper currency in circulation is tainted with trace amounts of cocaine. It isn't because everyone is a drug lord. It is simply because money is incredibly efficient at holding on to particles. It's transferred at bank tellers, through high-speed counting machines, and via the thousands of pockets it inhabits before reaching yours. This brings us to the airport terminal, a place where the logic of science often clashes with the convenience of law enforcement. Drug-sniffing dogs are trained to detect the chemical signature of narcotics. When they alert to your luggage, they are doing exactly what they were trained to do, smelling the microscopic residue on your cash. However, police departments often use this alert as the sole justification to establish a narcotics nexus. This is a legal term effectively used to argue that because the money smells like drugs, it must be drug proceeds, justifying an immediate warrantless seizure. This is where the nightmare begins. Because these seizures often occur under civil asset forfeiture laws, you aren't fighting a criminal charge where you have the presumption of innocence. Instead, the government often charges the money itself as the defendant. To get it back, you have to prove in a civil court that the cash was legitimately earned, a process that is often more expensive than the cash you lost. journalists have frequently exposed the reality behind this policy. For example, in the Fort Lauderdale investigations, task forces were caught seizing thousands of dollars from travelers based solely on K-9 alerts. They would take the cash, let the traveler go without filing a single criminal charge, and then keep the funds. It essentially transforms travel into a high-stakes lottery where the prize is a long-distance call to a lawyer, and the house almost always wins. 2. Operation Jetway and the Vibe Check. For decades, the DEA's Operation Jetway operated as a masterclass in state-sponsored paranoia, aimed at interdicting drug money and narcotics. This massive initiative trained thousands of officers to transform airports, train stations, and bus terminals into surveillance zones. The premise was simple. If you looked hard enough, everyone was a suspect. The program relied on a labyrinthine list of behavioral indicators, a collection of subjective traits so broad they effectively criminalized the act of simply existing in public. These markers weren't grounded in rigorous forensic science. They were grounded in vibes. Consider the inherent absurdity of the indicators. The demeanor trap. Agents were trained to spot nervousness as a sign of guilt. Yet, if a traveler appeared too calm or stoic, that, too, was flagged as a calculated cover-up. You were essentially damned if you did and damned if you didn't. The mundane made illegal. Wearing a jacket in warm weather? Suspicious. Yawning, whistling, or shifting your weight? Obviously, you were masking intent. Even standard travel habits were weaponized. Paying with cash was a red flag, but buying a ticket with a credit card at the last minute? That was, inexplicably, also a red flag. Movement patterns. Walking too fast, walking too slow, or pacing near the gate were all categorized as suspicious behavior. Perhaps the most insidious tool was the cold consent encounter. Agents would approach travelers without a shred of probable cause, relying heavily on the inherent power imbalance of the situation. By asking, "Do you mind if I search your bags?" While displaying a badge and uniform, they leveraged the traveler's natural intimidation to extract a yes. It was technically consensual, but functionally coerced. By early 2025, the DEA officially shuttered Operation Jetway, acknowledging that it had become a bloated profiling machine that produced more civil liberties violations than actual arrests. But the victory is bittersweet. While the name has been retired, the playbook has not. Similar behavioral detection tactics remain deeply entrenched within CBP operations and local law enforcement task forces. The program is gone, but the culture of guilty until proven innocent remains alive and well at your local terminal. But we've reached the final entry, the big one, the reason why innocent until proven guilty doesn't apply to your bank account. 1. Civil asset forfeiture, the in rem trap.
The number one reason the $10,000 rule is a lie is a legal loophole called civil asset forfeiture.
In a normal criminal case, the government has to prove you did something wrong. In a civil forfeiture case, the government sues the money. That's why the court cases have crazy names like United States versus $41,000 in US currency. Since the money is the defendant, it doesn't have constitutional rights, no right to an attorney, and no beyond a reasonable doubt standard. The government only has to show a preponderance of the evidence, basically, that it's more likely than not the money was involved in a crime. And here's the kicker. The agencies that seize the money usually get to keep up to 80% of the proceeds through a program called equitable sharing.
This creates what experts call policing for profits. Between 2000 and 2019, the federal government raked in over $45 billion through this system. And the average seizure? It's only about $1,276. Why is that important? Because it costs about $3,000 to $5,000 just to hire a lawyer to fight for your money back. The government knows that for most people, it's literally cheaper to let them steal the money than it is to hire a lawyer to get it back.
It's the perfect legal trap. Owners are stuck in limbo for an average of 193 days, just waiting to see a judge, while the seizing agency is already planning how to spend the cash. So, there you have it. The $10,000 rule isn't a safety net, it's a jurisdictional hook. If you're traveling with cash, your best bet is a wire transfer, a cashier's check, or carrying a mountain of paperwork proving exactly where every cent came from.
Before you head off to your next flight, hit that subscribe button if this video opened your eyes. And if you've ever had a weird encounter with airport security, tell us your story in the comments.
We're building a community here to help each other navigate these crazy rules, so your input is huge. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.